Have I then lost the fruit of all my care? I have all my efforts been so little avail that as soon as my presence no longer restrains you, you are quite ready to bathe once more in each other's blood? And in speaking thus, he paced the room with rapid strides, and striking his forehead with his hand, exclaimed, "Alas, poor France! Long yet must thou need the guardian's care. I have done all in my power," continued he, "to quell all your dissensions, to unite all parties. Has been the constant object of my solicitude. I have made all meet under the same roof, sit at the same board, and drink of the same cup. I have a right to expect that you will second my endeavors. Since I have taken the reins of government, have I inquired into the lives, actions, opinions, or writings of anyone imitate my forbearance. I have never had but one aim, never asked but this one question. Will you sincerely assist me in promoting the true interest of France? And all those who have answered affirmatively have been placed by me in a straight road, cased in rock, and without issue on either side, through which I have urged them on to the other extremity, when my finger pointed to the honor, the glory, and the splendor of France." This reprimand was so severe that the person to whom it was addressed, a man of honor and delicate feelings, determined upon asking an audience the next day in order to tender his resignation. He was admitted to the presence of the emperor, who immediately said to him, "My dear sir, you are come on account of the conversation of yesterday. You felt hurt on the occasion, and I have felt no less so. But it was a piece of advice which I thought it right to give to more than one person. If it has a desired effect of producing some public good, we must not either of us regret the circumstance. Think no more about it." And he spoke of something else. Thus would the emperor often censure whole bodies in the person of one single individual, and in order to strike with greater awe, he did it in a most solemn and imposing manner. But the anger which he sometimes showed in public, and of which so much has been said, was only feigned and put on for the moment. The emperor affirmed that by such means he had often deterred many from the commission of a fault, and spared himself the necessity of punishing. One day at one of his grand audiences, he attacked the colonel with the utmost vehemence, and quite in a tone of anger, upon some slight disorders of which his regiment had been guilty towards the inhabitants of the countries they had passed through in returning to France. During the reprimand, the colonel, thinking the punishment out of all proportion to the fault of which he was accused, repeatedly endeavored to excuse himself, but the emperor, without interrupting his speech, said to him in an undertone, "Very well, but hold your tongue. I believe you, but say nothing." And when he afterwards saw him in private, he said to him, "When I thus addressed you, I was chastising in your person certain generals whom I saw near you, and whom, had I spoken to them direct, would have been found deserving of the lowest degradation, and perhaps something worse. But it sometimes happened also that the emperor was publicly appealed to. I have witnessed several instances of this kind. One day at St. Cloud, at the grand audience which was held on each Sunday, a sub-prefect or some public officer of Piedmont, who was standing by my side, addressed the emperor in a loud tone of voice, and with the utmost emotion, calling for justice, asserting that he had been falsely accused and unjustly condemned and dismissed from the service. "Apply to my ministers," answered the emperor. "No, sire, I wish to be judged by you. That is impossible. My time is wholly absorbed with the general interests of the empire, and my ministers are appointed to take into consideration the particular cases of individuals. But they will condemn me. For what reason? Because everybody's against me. Why? Because I love you. To love you, sire, is a sufficient motive to inspire everyone with hatred." All bystanders were disconcerted at this answer and read with confusion, but the emperor replied with the utmost calmness, "This is rather a strange assertion, sir, but I am willing to hope that you are mistaken." And he passed on to the next person. On another occasion, also on the parade, a young officer stepped out of the ranks in extreme agitation to complain that he had been ill-used, slighted, and passed over, and that he had been 5 years lieutenant without being able to obtain promotion. "Calm yourself," said the emperor. "I was 7 years lieutenant, and yet you see that a man may push himself forward for all that. Everybody laughed, and the young officer, suddenly cooled by those few words, returned to his place. Nothing indeed was more common than to see private individuals attack the emperor and hold out against him, and I have often seen him thus sharply and warmly disputed with and unable to silence his opponent, give up the contest by addressing another person or by turning the conversation to another subject. It may be observed as a general principle that, however violent the emperor's actions might appear, they were always the result of calculation. When one of my ministers said he or some other great personage had been guilty of a fault of so grave a nature that it became absolutely necessary for me to be very angry, I always took care in that case to have a third person present to witness a scene that was to ensue, for it was a general maxim with me that when I resolved to strike a blow, it must be felt by many at the same time. The immediate object of my resentment did not feel more incensed against me on that account, and the bystander, whose embarrassed appearance was highly ludicrous, did not fail to run and circulate most discreetly, as far as he could, all that he had seen and heard. A salutary terror ran thus from vein to vein through the body's social. A new impulse was given to the march of affairs. I had less to punish, and a great deal of public good was obtained without inflicting much private hardship. Sunday the 2nd, the emperor rode out on horseback about 8 o'clock. He had long since abstained from enjoying that exercise and returning through the valley of the company's garden. He went into that house of one of the company's adjutants, whose wife is a Catholic. He remained there a few minutes only and was in high spirits. We next week went to the house of Madame Bertrand, to whom the emperor paid a long visit. He alluded in the strongest terms, with infinite humor, of the behavior of the governor towards us, to his paltry measures, his total want of consideration, the absurd manner in which he conducted the affairs of the governor of the island, and his total ignorance of the business and manners of life. We had certainly some reason to complain of the admiral, said the emperor, but he at least was an Englishman, and this man is nothing but a shire of Italy. We have not the same manners, said he. We cannot understand each other. Our feelings do not speak the same language. He probably cannot conceive, for instance, that heaps of diamonds would be insufficient to atone for the affront he has offered in causing one of my domestics to be arrested almost in my presence. Since that day, all my household are in consternation. On returning from our ride, we breakfasted in the garden in the evening whilst we were taking an airing in the calash and going over what we called the double tour. We beguiled away the time by making an estimate of the expenses of the man possessing an income of 150,000 livres in Paris. The emperor said that a sixth of that sum should go for the stable, a fourth for the table. I have already said that he was fond of making such calculations, which he always had the art of placing in a new and unexpected light. The conversation led us on to some details worthy of remark on the civil list and expenses of the emperor's household. The following are amongst those I remembered. 1 million was allowed for the table, and yet the expense of the emperor's own dinner did not exceed 100 francs a day. It had never been found possible to manage to give him his dinner hot, for when once engaged in his closet, it was impossible to know when he would leave it. Therefore, when the hour of dinner arrived, a fowl was put on the spit for him every half hour, and it has sometimes happened that several dozen have been roasted before that which is finally be set before him. The conversation now turned upon the advantages of a good administration of finances. The emperor spoke highly of the talents of Messrs. de Napoleon and La Bouillerie in that branch. Monsieur de Napoleon, in particular, had put the treasury on the footing of a simple banking house, and the emperor had continually under his eyes in a small book for that purpose a complete statement of the revenue, the receipt, the expenditure, the arrears, resources, etc. The emperor had in his cellars at the Tuileries, added he, as much as 400 millions of gold, which were entirely his own property, so much so, indeed, that no other account of it existed but in a small book in the hands of his private treasurer. All this treasure disappeared by degrees and was applied to the expenses of the empire, particularly at the time of our disasters. How could I think, said he, of keeping anything for myself? I had identified myself with the nation. He further added that he had sent to thousand millions in species into France without taking into account what private individuals might have brought on their own account. The emperor said he had been much hurt at the conduct of Monsieur de Bouillerie, who, being at Orleans in 1814 in charge of several millions belonging to him, Napoleon, his own private property, had taken them to the Côte d'Artois in Paris instead of carrying them to Fontainebleau, as he was in duty and in conscience bound to do. And yet, La Bouillerie was not a bad man, said the emperor. I had both loved him and esteemed him. On my return in 1815, he earnestly entreated me to see him and hear what he had to say in his own defense. He no doubt would have proved that his fault arose from ignorance and not of his heart. He knew me. He was aware that if he could approach me, the affair would be settled with a few angry expressions on my part, but also knew my own weakness. I was resolved not to take him into my service again, and therefore refused to admit him. It was the only way in which I could hope at that moment to hold out against him and several others. As Steve, the predecessor of the Bouillerie, would not have acted in that manner. He was entirely devoted to my person. He would have brought my treasure to Fontainebleau at all hazards, or if he had failed in the endeavor, he would have thrown it into a river or distributed it in various places rather than give it up. Monday the 3rd, the emperor, after having been 3 hours in his bath, went out at 5 o'clock to take a walk in the garden. He was taciturn and dejected and wore the appearance of suffering. We afterwards drove out in the caleche, and by degrees he became more cheerful and talkative. On our return, he continued to walk for some time, and in order to engage in a playful warfare with one of the ladies present, he affected to declaim against women. We men of the West, said he, winking sideways to us, and at the same time to let us know he was just jesting, know nothing at all about the matter. We have acted most unwisely in treating women too well. We have imprudently allowed them to rank almost as our equals. In the East, they have more sense and judgment. Their women are pronounced to be the actual property of man, and so indeed they are. Nature has made them our slaves, and it is only by presuming upon our folly that they can aspire to govern us, and by abusing the advantages which they possess that they succeed in fascinating us and establishing their dominion over us. For one woman that inspires us with proper sentiments, there are 100 who lead us into errors. He then went on to express his approbation of the maxims of the Oriental nations, highly commended the practice of polygamy, which he considered to be that pointed out by nature, and displayed considerable ingenuity and fertility of invention in the choice and number of arguments which he adduced in support of his opinion. Woman, said he, is given to man to bear children to him, but one woman cannot suffice to one man for that purpose. For a woman cannot fulfill the duties of a wife during the period of her gestation, while she suckles her child, or when she is ill, and she ceases altogether to be a wife when she is no longer able to bear children. To man, on the contrary, nature has supposed no such obstacles in any period of his existence. A man should therefore have several wives. After all, continued he, smiling significantly, what have you to complain of, ladies? Have we not acknowledged that you possess a soul? Though certain philosophers, you know, have entertained doubts on this point. You aim at equality, but that is madness. Woman is our property. We are not hers. For it is she that gives us children, and not we to her. She is therefore the property of man in the same manner as the fruit tree is the property of the gardener. If the husband be unfaithful to his wife, and he confess his fault and repent of it, there is an end of the matter. No trace of it is left. The wife is angry, forgiveness, or becomes reconciled, and not unfrequently is a gainer on the occasion. But the case is widely different when the wife is unmindful of the marriage vow. It is of no avail for her to repent. The consequences of her guilt are incalculable, the mischief irreparable. She can never confess it. You will therefore agree with me, ladies, that it can only be an error of judgment, the want of education, or the preponderance of vulgar notions that can prompt a wife to believe herself the equal in every respect of her husband. There is, however, nothing disparaging in the inequality equality. Each sex has its attributes and its duties. Your attributes, ladies, are beauty, grace, fascination. Your duties, submission and dependence, etc., etc. After dinner, the emperor desired my son to bring him the Memoirs of the Chevalier de Grammont and a volume of Voltaire's plays, having, as he said, imposed on himself the task of remaining up till 11 o'clock. The emperor read for some time the Memoirs, observing that a very little could be rendered amusing when seasoned with genuine wit. He afterwards turned over Mahomet, Semiramis, and other plays by Voltaire, pointing out their faults and blemishes, and concluding, as he generally did, that Voltaire had no knowledge either of affairs of men or the real passions of human nature. Tuesday the 4th, the emperor sent for me at about 4 o'clock to take a road in the calash. He told me he had at last been dictating again, and that what had been done would not be found devoid of interest. He added that he had been during the whole morning very much out of humor, that he had at first attempted to go out about 1 o'clock, but that he had found himself compelled to return into the house pursued by disgust and ennui, and that not knowing what to do with himself, he had thought of resuming his dictations. The emperor had long since ceased to apply himself regularly to this occupation. Several months had already elapsed since my campaigns of Italy were finished. The campaigns of Egypt, which he had dictated to General Bertrand, was also completed, and General Gourgaud had been very ill. All these circumstances had concurred to cause interruptions which had engendered disgust. The emperor had not proceeded further and could not summon courage to begin again. I took advantage of what he had just said to represent to him that to dictate was, for him, the surest, the only remedy against ennui, the only way in which he could beguile the tedious hours, and for us the means of obtaining the inestimable advantage of being put in possession of treasures, in the existence of which the honor and glory of France were equally interested. I urged that it was of paramount importance that he should continue to write his own history. Each of us, said I, would willingly give his life to obtain it. It was due to his memory, to his family, to us. Where would his son find the events of his father's life faithfully recorded? What pen could be found equal to the task of retracing them in a manner worthy of the subject? And yet, without such invaluable documents, how many events would be buried with Napoleon and remain forever unknown? We who surrounded him formerly, what did we then know? How much had we not learned here? The emperor replied that he would continue his memoirs, and consulted me as to the plan to be followed in digesting them, should they appear as a history or as annals. He discussed the point for a long time, but without coming to any conclusion. At dinner he said, I have today been severely reprimanded on account of my idleness. I'm therefore going to take to my task again and embrace several periods at the same time. Each of you shall have his share. Did not Herodotus, said he, looking at me, give to his books the names of the muses? I intend that each of mine shall bear the name of one of you. Even little Emmanuel shall give his to one of them. I will begin the history of the consulate with Montsalon. Gourgaud shall record the events of some other period or detached battles, and little Emmanuel shall prepare the documents and materials necessary to commemorate the period of the coronation. Wednesday the 5th. The emperor went out at about 4 o'clock. He had been 3 hours in his bath. He did not feel well, yet the weather was delightful. It was like fine afternoon of Europe. We walked until we came up into the calash, and then took for our usual drive. Our conversation turned upon the military school of Paris before the revolution, and we contrasted the footing of luxury upon which we were placed at that school with the severe discipline introduced by the emperor in these establishments under his reign. At the military school of Paris, we were treated in every respect like officers of fortune, boarded and waited upon in a style of great magnificence, greater indeed than the circumstances of most our families warranted, and greater than most of us could hope to be better to keep up after life. The emperor had been anxious, he said, to avoid falling into this error. He had wished above all that his young officers, who were one day to command soldiers, should begin by being soldiers themselves and learn by experience all the technical details of the service. A system of education, he added, which must ever produce an immense advantage to an officer in the course of his future career by enabling him to watch over and enforce the observance of those details in others who are placed under his orders. It was according to this principle that at Saint-Germain the young students were obliged to groom their own horses, were taught to shoe them, etc. The same spirit presided over the regulations at Saint-Cyr. There, several pupils were made to lodge together in one large apartment. A common mess was provided for all indiscriminately. Yet the attention paid to these particulars was not suffered to interfere with the care bestowed upon the instruction necessary to qualify them for their future career. In short, they did not leave St. Cyr before they had really earned the rank of officer, and were found capable of leading and commanding soldiers. And it must be admitted, the emperor observed, that if the young man who passed from that institution at its origin into different corps of the army were at first viewed with jealousy, ample justice was soon rendered to their discipline and to their abilities. The establishments of Écouen, Saint-Denis, and others which the benevolent solicitude of Napoleon had created for the daughters of members of the Legion of Honor were conducted upon principles of a similar nature. Some of the rules made for the emperor himself ordered that every article for the use of the institution should be made in the house and by the hands of the pupils themselves, and forbade every species of luxury, extravagance in dress and plays. The object being, he said, to form good housewives and honest women. Public opinion had given to Napoleon at the time of his elevation the reputation of a man of a harsh disposition and void of sensibility. Yet it is certain that no sovereign ever acted more from the impulse of genuine feelings than he did, but from a peculiar turn of mind. He concealed all emotions of the heart, which as much care as others take to display them. He had adopted all the children of the soldiers and officers killed at Austerlitz, and with him such an act would not have been one of mere form. He would have provided for them all. I heard the following anecdote from a young man who has related it to me since my return to Europe with tears of gratitude in his eyes. He had been fortunate enough, when yet very young, to attract the emperor's notice by some signal proof of his devotedness. Napoleon asked him what profession he would wish to embrace, and without waiting for his answer, pointed out one himself. The young man observed that his father's fortune was not sufficient to allow him to follow it. "What has that to do with it?" replied the emperor hastily. "Am I not also your father?" Those persons who have known Napoleon in his private life, who have lived near his person, can quote 1,000 traits of the same kind. He had done much for the army and the veterans, and proposed to do much, much more. Every day some new thought tending to that object occupied his mind. The plan of a decree was one day laid before us in the council state, proposing that in future all vacant situations in the customs, the collection of the revenue, and the excise should be given to wounded soldiers or to veterans capable of filling them, from the private up to the highest ranks in the army. This plan being coldly received, the emperor addressed one of those who opposed it in his usual manner, urging him to discuss the question freely and state his opinion without reserve. "Sire," answered M. Mahomet, "my objection is that I fear the other classes of the nation will feel themselves aggrieved in seeing the army preferred to them." "Sir," replied the emperor warmly, "you make a distinction which does not exist. The army no longer forms a separate class of the nation. In the situation in which we are now placed, no member of the state is exempt from being a soldier. To follow a military career is no longer a matter of choice, it is one of necessity. The greatest number of those who are engaged in that career have been compelled to abandon their own profession against their will. It is therefore but justice that they should receive some kind of compensation for it." "But," observes again the member who opposed the plan, Will it not be inferred that your majesty intends that in future almost all vacant situations shall be given to soldiers? And such is indeed my intention, said the emperor. Sir, the only question is whether I have the right to do so, and whether I thereby commit an act of injustice. Now, the Constitution gives me the nomination of all places, and I think it a principle of strict equity that those who have suffered most have the greatest claims to be indemnified. Then, raising his voice, he added, Gentlemen, war is not a profession of ease and comfort. Quietly seated on your benches here, you know it is only by reading our bulletins or by hearing of our triumphs. You know nothing of our nightly watches, our forced marches, the sufferings and privations of every kind to which we are exposed. But I do know them, because I witness them and sometimes share in them. This plan, however, like many others, was at last abandoned after having been several times under discussion and variously modified, and the beneficent intentions of the emperor were, I believe, not even known to the public, though he had appeared to take a lively interest in the passing of this decree and to defend it in the most minute details.